I opened my front door to the unmistakable sound of a blender running on full blast, and there she was, sitting in a pink golf cart in my driveway, making frozen margaritas at 8:47 in the morning. Next to her, a folding table covered in HOA pamphlets, a Bluetooth speaker blaring yacht rock, and a little sign that read Karen's cart, VIP only. My car, completely boxed in behind her glorified scooter, sat helpless. I needed to leave in 15 minutes for a job interview that could change my life. But apparently Karen, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed HOA Queen, decided my driveway was the perfect venue for her impromptu brunch briefing. And when I asked her, calmly, to move her cart, she sipped her drink, looked me in the eye and said, "Some of us have real responsibilities. Maybe find a job that doesn't depend on parking space, sweetheart." I stood there, stunned, watching as Karen adjusted the sunshade on her glitter-drenched golf cart and greeted neighbors like she was on a campaign trail. The kicker? This wasn't the first time she'd parked on someone else's property like she owned it. No, this was just the first time she did it to me. And I don't take that lightly. See, I just spent the last 6 months rebuilding my life from scratch after a messy layoff and a gut-wrenching breakup. I had landed an interview for a major logistics contract that morning, one that could launch my new business and get me back on my feet. And now this woman, whose greatest accomplishment this week was banning inflatable flamingos from front lawns, had just physically blocked me from getting there. I tried again, a little more firmly this time, to explain that I had somewhere important to be. Karen rolled her eyes and waved me off with one perfectly manicured hand. "It's just a cart," she said with a smirk. "It's not like I parked a tank. Calm down." Then she tapped her little HOA badge. Yes, she actually had one custom-made, and muttered something about entitled men with tempers. My jaw clenched so hard I could hear my teeth grind. I wasn't about to get into a shouting match on my front lawn, so I went back inside, fuming. I called the local tow company. They said they couldn't touch it without HOA permission since technically, my driveway was part of the shared access easement. I called the non-emergency police line. They said it was a civil dispute. Even the city's parking enforcement had nothing to offer. I was legally boxed in, and Karen knew it. She'd found the one loophole that let her treat my property like a mobile lounge, and she was exploiting it to the fullest. So I called the interview location, apologized profusely, and tried to reschedule. The receptionist was kind, but I could tell it was a stretch. "We've got other candidates," she said. "But we'll see what we can do." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table, seething in silence. Outside, I could still hear Karen's blender. The ice cubes taunted me. By noon, the party had grown. A few of her friends from the HOA board had joined her on my driveway, wearing sun hats and sipping mimosas like they were poolside at a resort. Someone brought pastries. They were laughing at something Karen said. And when I peeked through the blinds, I saw her pointing at my house and making a flapping gesture with her hand. I didn't need to hear the words to know she was mocking me. Something about how men like me don't belong in a neighborhood like this unless we're mowing the lawns. She stayed there all afternoon. At one point, she even set up a collapsible umbrella over the cart, like she planned to make it permanent. It was surreal, like a petty HOA version of squatters' rights, except she was on wheels. That night, she finally rolled the cart away. But it was back the next morning. And the next. By day 3, she'd added lawn chairs and a Bluetooth speaker. She called it Community Engagement Hour. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, even videos. I measured how far the cart extended into my driveway. I researched easement law. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA compliance office, only to find out that Karen was the compliance office, and she conveniently lost my paperwork. I went door to door asking neighbors if they'd had similar experiences. Some nodded sympathetically but didn't want to get involved. Others just laughed and said, "That's Karen for you." No one seemed to think it could be stopped. One old guy named Phil told me, Son, she once fined me $100 for having my recycling bin visible from the street. On pickup day. You're not gonna win against her. I thanked him and walked home with a storm brewing in my head. The worst part wasn't the inconvenience. It was the absolute smugness. Karen didn't just block my driveway, she rubbed it in like she'd won something. She walked around with that smug little smile, like she'd finally found someone new to torment. And the HOA? They were all in her pocket, either afraid of her or worse, fans of her theatrics. One of them even posted in the neighborhood Facebook group that Karen was keeping our streets safe from irresponsible newcomers. Newcomers. I've lived here for 6 years. By the end of the week, I had a folder full of documented harassment, a long list of complaints, and no solution. She parked the cart a little further into my driveway each day, like marking territory. On Friday, she left it overnight, and this time, she locked the steering wheel with a custom club device like it was a Bentley. That's when something inside me clicked. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the caffeine-fueled rage from 5 days of early morning blender noise. Or maybe it was the realization that I had something Karen didn't. Leverage. Because while Karen was busy turning my driveway into her personal HOA HQ, she hadn't bothered to ask what I do for a living. If she had, she might have hesitated. I'm a logistics consultant. I design transportation strategies for companies that move heavy, awkward equipment across impossible terrain. I know people who can lift a 20-ton HVAC unit off a skyscraper rooftop with 2 guys and a crane. So moving a golf cart? That's nothing. She thought she won. She thought she was untouchable. But what she didn't realize was that she had parked her smug little throne in the driveway of a man who moves mountains for a living. She didn't block me in. She just gave me a target. And I was done playing nice. I spent the weekend buried in planning. While Karen continued hosting morning cocktails from her golf cart, I started calling in favors. Not just casual calls either. These were the kind of calls that made seasoned crane operators pause mid-lunch and go, "Wait, what?" I told them exactly what I needed. A precision lift, light rigging, nothing damaged, no laws broken, and maximum visibility. One guy named Rick laughed for a full minute before saying, "You're serious, aren't you?" I told him I'd cover gas, permits, insurance, and throw in a dinner for his entire crew. By Sunday afternoon, the lift was scheduled for Wednesday morning, just in time for Karen's usual HOA coffee and complaints hour. But I wasn't just planning a petty stunt. I was laying down a legal minefield. Karen might have been bold, but I was strategic. I knew she'd go crying to the HOA board, the police, maybe even the local news, once her precious cart went airbound. So I prepped. I cross-checked city codes. I called a lawyer, well, technically my sister-in-law, who just happens to be a civil rights attorney who lives for fights like this. When I explained the situation, she let out a long, slow sigh, then said, "So, you're asking me to help you crane lift an HOA president's golf cart onto her own roof?" I confirmed. She said, "I'll handle the paperwork. And if she sues, I'll make sure it's the worst day of her life." Monday morning arrived with Karen back in my driveway like clockwork. This time, she wore a sash that said HOA Royalty and was handing out flyers titled, "Neighborhood Offenders. Know the Signs." I was listed as resident number 4 and accused of garage misuse and excessive sarcasm in public forums. It took everything in me not to laugh in her face. But I stayed calm. That's what threw her off. I didn't protest. I didn't ask her to move. I just waved politely as I walked past her, clipboard in hand, measuring the clearance around my driveway. By Tuesday, I'd arranged 3 utility flags around the edges of the driveway. To any regular person, they looked like basic survey markers, but they were carefully placed to create visual clearance for the crane operator and to signal legal prep in progress, in case Karen tried to argue interference. The best part? Karen noticed them and assumed they were for some boring underground cable work. She even moved her cart deeper into the driveway to avoid city fines. That was perfect. She parked exactly where I needed her to, right in the sweet spot. She had no idea she was positioning herself for liftoff. That afternoon, she held a surprise HOA meeting at the community center titled, The War on Disorder. I showed up, quietly, and sat in the back. Karen strutted in like a dictator addressing her people, wearing her signature visor and holding a stack of violation letters like playing cards. She launched into a 10-minute monologue about how certain residents think they're above the law and that this is a community, not a circus. Then she made the mistake of saying my name out loud and accusing me of threatening the safety of the HOA board through intimidation tactics. That's when my sister-in-law, seated next to me, stood up and introduced herself, full name, law firm, bar number, and all, and calmly asked Karen if she would like to repeat those accusations into a microphone for the official record. Karen paled. She stammered something about community tone and changed the subject. The room, which had been eating out of her hand moments ago, suddenly felt very, very cold. Karen tried to recover by doubling down. He's trying to create chaos, she snapped. He's using city codes to manipulate our community's peaceful structure. He's not one of us. That last line? That was the one that made the room shift. Because I'd lived here for 6 years. Helped shovel snow during the winter. Hosted barbecues. Babysat a neighbor's kid when their sitter bailed. The only difference was that I didn't wear a sash and terrorize people over mailbox height. After the meeting, several neighbors quietly came up to me and whispered variations of, "She's out of control," and "I'm so glad someone's finally doing something." I thanked them without explaining the details. The fewer people who knew about the crane, the better. I wanted this to hit like a magic trick, sudden, impossible, and unforgettable. That night, I got a call from Rick, the crane guy. He said, "We're good to go. You sure she's gonna park it in the same spot tomorrow?" I told him she was predictable. Obsessively so. Her entire life revolved around routine and control. She'd park it there because she always did. And if for some reason she didn't, I had a backup plan involving a lure of free pastries and fake HOA survey result. But I didn't think I'd need it. Wednesday morning. D-Day. The sun rose on schedule, and so did Karen. At 8:30 a.m., like a heavily perfumed groundhog, she emerged from her house, glittering cart in tow. She parked in my driveway, set up her umbrella, and began blending smoothies. I watched from my window, coffee in hand, heart pounding like a drum. It was showtime. At exactly 9:05 a.m., a large flatbed crane truck rolled onto the street. Rick stepped out, clipboard in hand, hard hat on, and walked up my driveway like he was about to install air conditioning units on a casino roof. Karen noticed immediately and stormed over, barking, "What is this? Who are you? You can't be here. This is a residential area." Rick smiled and pointed at his paperwork. "City permitted equipment removal. Pre-scheduled. Everything's legal. Check with code enforcement if you have questions." Karen turned to me, her face the color of uncooked chicken, and hissed, "What are you doing?" I shrugged. "Just clearing my driveway. You wouldn't move your cart, and it's not registered as a vehicle, so it qualifies for equipment removal under Ordinance 17B. Legal clause. I'll send you the documentation if you'd like." She screamed something unintelligible and lunged toward the cart, but Rick's crew had already surrounded it with safety cones and started attaching the harnesses. A crowd began to gather. Phones came out. People started whispering, then laughing. Karen tried calling the police, but the officer who showed up, Officer Garcia, a regular in our neighborhood, took one look at the paperwork, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Ma'am, this all checks out. If you didn't want your cart lifted, you shouldn't have parked it there." I watched, breath held, as the crane lifted the cart off the ground with perfect balance. Karen gasped like she was watching her child be abducted by aliens. The cart rose into the air, 10 feet, 20 feet, swinging gently in the breeze. Everyone was watching, some clapping, some filming, but no one stopped it. And then came the moment no one expected. Karen, in a full meltdown, shouted, "Where are you taking it? You better not damage it. That cart cost me $7,000. I smiled and pointed at her roof. She followed my gaze. And for the first time since I'd known her, Karen was completely silent. The crane operator moved with surgical precision, every motion practiced and fluid like he'd done this 100 times, which, to be fair, he had, just never with a golf cart being hoisted above a suburban home while a neighborhood's most notorious control freak screamed from below. Karen stood in her robe and slippers, eyes wide, jaw slack, hands trembling like she wasn't sure whether to grab a bullhorn or just faint. But she didn't move. The entire neighborhood stood frozen, a mix of horror, awe, and unfiltered delight washing over them as the pink monstrosity slowly floated over the roofline. The cart rose like a gleaming, glittery phoenix in reverse. The wheels spun lazily in the air, the umbrella on top flapping gently, its little tassels dancing in the wind. Rick gave a slight nod to his rigging assistant, then guided the cart gently over Karen's two-story house. It hovered for a beat, a pink monument suspended in judgment, then began to lower slowly toward its perch like the final piece of a very expensive, very absurd rooftop diorama. The harnesses were tight, the safety locks were set, and when the wheels finally touched down on the flattened portion of Karen's roof, meant originally for solar panels that she had petitioned to ban for aesthetic reasons, the entire street broke into stunned applause. Karen didn't. She broke into a full-scale, vein-popping tantrum. She screamed that it was trespassing. She shrieked that it was assault. She even tried calling the fire department to perform an emergency extraction, only to be told that a non-operational golf cart on a non-occupied roof didn't qualify for immediate response. Then she threatened to call the mayor. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Do it? Maybe he wants a rooftop tour too." A few people laughed. Someone else filmed her meltdown, narrating it like a wildlife documentary. It went viral before lunch. I stood with my arms crossed, watching the chaos with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, okay, maybe a little, but because for the first time Karen wasn't untouchable. She wasn't in control. And no amount of HOA jargon or passive-aggressive flyers could stop what had just happened. She had blocked my driveway for a week, mocked my career, and weaponized local ordinances like they were party favors. Now her prized golf cart was on her roof like a lawn ornament of karmic justice. She stormed toward me, face red and puffed up like a heat-blasted balloon, and jabbed a finger at my chest. "You'll pay for this. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to have your business license revoked. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." I smiled. Actually, I didn't touch a thing. The crane company executed a permitted equipment relocation. The city signed off on it. And the HOA handbook you wrote says, non-vehicular items left in community driveways for over 72 hours may be subject to removal. Technically, this was just enforcement. She blinked like she'd swallowed glass. For once, her beloved rules were being used against her. The realization seemed to short-circuit her brain. She turned on her heel and stormed back toward her house, muttering something about defamation and neighborhood disgrace. The crowd lingered a while longer, snapping photos, laughing quietly, and pointing out how the pink cart actually added a touch of color to her otherwise drab gray roof. By mid-afternoon, Karen had disappeared entirely. Blinds shut, curtains drawn. A dark and silent fortress. But her silence was temporary. That night, she returned with vengeance in her eyes and a stack of freshly printed flyers, each one accusing me of unethical retaliation and threatening the stability of the community. She stuffed them into every mailbox on the block, though several of them ended up in trash bins before morning. One neighbor even taped their flyer back on her front door with the note, "Please remove your cart from the sky before preaching about stability." The next day, I received a cease and desist letter. Hand-delivered. Signed Karen H., President, Neighborhood Beautification Authority, NBA. She had made up a new title. Not legally registered, not approved by any HOA vote, Just invented it out of sheer spite. My sister-in-law reviewed the letter and laughed so hard she had to set her wine glass down. "This isn't a legal document," she said. "It's a tantrum with letterhead." Still, Karen tried to rally the troop. She scheduled another emergency HOA meeting to address community vandalism and aerial threats. But something shifted this time. Half the board members didn't show up. A few residents stood up and said they supported what I did. They were tired of her bullying, her random fines, her sudden bans on flower pots and welcome mats. One guy told a story about how she fined him for leaving a soccer ball on his porch overnight. A soccer ball. The room began to shift from fear to fury. Then came the real surprise. The HOA vice president, a quiet woman named Marlene who usually sat in the back, stood up and announced a motion to temporarily suspend Karen's authority pending an internal review. Karen's eyes bugged out. "You can't do that," she screeched. "I created this HOA." Marlene replied, "That's the problem." The motion passed. Karen stormed out again. This time, she didn't look quite so royal. Back at home, I started receiving thank-you note. Actual handwritten cards from neighbors who had suffered in silence for years. One woman baked me cookies. Another offered to help repaint my fence. People were grateful, not just for the cart stunt, but for proving that the iron grip Karen had over the neighborhood was breakable. Someone even printed t-shirts that said, "Free the driveways." As for the cart, it stayed on the roof. I had it secured with safety anchors and padded feet so it wouldn't damage the shingles. It became a landmark, almost. A few high school kids made it their senior prank to light it up with solar string lights one night. Someone else left a plastic flamingo next to it. It was ridiculous, yes, but it made people smile. Karen, however, wasn't smiling. She kept her curtains closed and stopped speaking to most of the street. But I knew she wasn't done. Karen didn't strike me as the type to surrender. She was scheming, plotting, probably calling her cousin, who once took a paralegal course, to draft another letter. So I stayed ready. Just because I'd won this round didn't mean the war was over. Still, for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. Not just because my driveway was clear, but because the balance had shifted. The tyrant had been publicly dethroned by her own rules, and her cart, the very symbol of her arrogance, was now a rooftop monument to neighborhood resistance. A strange, beautiful victory sitting quietly above her head, where even she couldn't ignore it. The next few days were eerily quiet. Karen's house, once the epicenter of unsolicited complaints and HOA drama, now looked like a haunted bunker. The blinds stayed closed. Her infamous clipboard was nowhere in sight. No more morning cart meetups, no more surprise inspections, no more shouting about gutter alignment from across the street. It was as if her entire personality had been suspended along with her glittery pink cart, now perched like a flamingo-shaped gargoyle on her roof. The absurdity of it all hadn't faded. If anything, it had taken on a life of its own. People walked their dogs slower past her house now, hoping to catch a glimpse or snap a picture. A couple of teenagers even posted a video doing synchronized dance moves in front of it with the caption, "Rooftop royalty, long may she reign." It blew up online. The neighborhood had never been more united, and bizarrely, never more cheerful. Karen, however, was anything but. On the fourth day post-lift, she emerged from her house with a pair of binoculars, standing in her yard and furiously scanning the cart as if hoping to spot a scratch she could sue me over. I stood in my own driveway, sipping coffee and waving. She didn't wave back. Instead, she stormed back inside and slammed her door with enough force to set off a neighbor's car alarm. Later that evening, she made her first move since the incident. She posted a rant in the neighborhood Facebook group, a long, rambling tirade accusing unnamed residents, but clearly aimed at me, of engineering hostile acts, violating sacred HOA bylaws, and conducting acts of neighborhood terrorism via mechanical hoisting. The post was flagged by 3 people within minutes. 5 others replied with memes. One said, Imagine being mad your golf cart got promoted to rooftop seating. Another posted a still from The Lion King with the caption, "Everything the light touches, Karen, is not your driveway." By Friday, the local news station picked up the story. A perky anchor named Lisa appeared in front of Karen's house, microphone in hand, reporting live. "It's not every day a golf cart becomes suburban art," she said with a grin. But residents of this neighborhood are saying this act was a long overdue check on unchecked HOA power. Behind her, the pink cart glinted in the sunlight, a ridiculous crown atop the house of the self-proclaimed Queen of Rules. Karen didn't come out during filming, but the curtains shifted just enough to confirm she was watching. The story aired that evening and spread like wildfire. Reddit was already on it. TikTok too. The story of Karen's catastrophe became a top thread on r/EntitledPeople. Comments poured in. Some called it petty perfection. Others hailed it as a masterclass in lawful revenge. A surprising number of people offered to donate money to keep the cart up there permanently. And then came the interview request. A producer from a streaming network sent me a message through my business website asking if I'd be willing to appear in a documentary about extreme HOA conflict. I almost deleted it thinking it was a prank, but then I looked up the producer's name. She was legit. She'd done a few popular series. She said they wanted to feature my story in an episode titled Power Trips and Parking Wars. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or say yes, but I replied with a cautious maybe. That's when I realized this thing had spiraled far beyond Karen's driveway or mine. It had become a story people could rally behind. One man versus the HOA monster. A David and Goliath story, only this time David had a crane and Goliath drove a pink golf cart with rhinestones on the dashboard. While Karen stewed, her authority continued to collapse from the inside out. The HOA vice president, Marlene, scheduled an emergency vote to appoint interim leadership and restructure board responsibilities. Karen tried to attend but was officially suspended from board duties pending behavioral review, which felt like code for, "We're finally sick of your nonsense." She protested outside the meeting room, holding a sign that said, "This is a coup." But nobody paid attention. Several people inside took turns sharing stories of how Karen had fined them for things like leaving their porch light on past 11 p.m. or planting tulips instead of approved daffodils. One man said she once measured the height of his birdbath and demanded it be lowered by 3 inches. Another woman revealed that Karen had anonymously reported her to animal control because her cat looked judgmental. It was like years of silent resentment had finally been given a microphone. I didn't even need to speak during the meeting. The cart did all the talking. When people mentioned the incident, they did so with a tone of reverence, like it had become neighborhood legend. And honestly, it had. The cart on the roof was now a fixture. At night, someone had started illuminating it with solar-powered spotlights. Another neighbor offered to set up a small wind spinner next to it. A few suggested we install a tiny sign that said, "Park responsibly." The whole thing had become a monument, not just to Karen's ego, but to the moment the community stood up to her and won. Karen, naturally, saw it differently. She hired a contractor to remove the cart, but when he arrived and saw the crowd gathered around it, he hesitated. He asked if it was dangerous. I explained the rigging. Legal, safe, non-damaging. He nodded and left. The next day, I got word he'd declined the job entirely. Apparently, his daughter had seen the TikTok and told him removing the cart would make him the villain. Karen tried to hire another. Same result. The cart stayed. That week, I hosted a neighborhood block party. I called it Cart Fest. We set up a bounce house, grilled burgers, and handed out little keychains shaped like golf carts. People laughed, swapped Karen stories, and posed for photos with the cart in the background. Kids made chalk drawings of it. Someone brought pink cupcakes. There was even a rooftop-themed playlist. Karen didn't come outside once, but we all knew she was watching. And the more people smiled, the smaller she seemed. The icing on the cake came when my business got a boost from the publicity. A client who'd previously been on the fence about signing a contract messaged me saying, "Any guy who can pull that off and keep it legal? That's who I want managing my logistics." I landed the deal. And just like that, the interview I missed because of Karen's cart became irrelevant. I was booked out for months. As for Karen, well, she still had a few tricks up her sleeve. The night after Cart Fest, someone saw her slipping around the side of my house with a clipboard in hand. She claimed she was checking for code violations. I informed her she was trespassing, and if I saw her near my property again, I'd file a restraining order. She sputtered about community safety and walked off into the shadows. The next morning, I found a paper taped to my door. It read, "You think you've won, but this isn't over. The HOA always rises." No signature. Just a cartoon drawing of a golf cart with wings. I framed it. It now hangs in my office, right under the photo of her cart glowing atop her roof at sunset. The final straw came quietly, like most truly ridiculous things do. One morning, just as the dew was burning off the lawns and the world was starting to smell like toast and sprinkler mist, I walked out to grab the paper and found a notice taped to my mailbox. It was printed in bold red letters and titled "Emergency Community Alert." At first glance, it looked official, until I read the fine print and saw it was from a new organization called the Neighborhood Order and Renewal Department. NORD for short. The signature at the bottom? Karen. No title, no HOA credentials, just Karen. She had created her own agency, her own governing body. After being stripped of HOA power and publicly dethroned, she went full vigilante bureaucrat. According to the notice, all residents were expected to attend a mandatory reorientation session hosted by Karen in her backyard that Saturday. The dress code was respectable neutrals, and the event promised refreshments, reprimands, and renewal. I wasn't even mad. I was fascinated. It takes a certain kind of ego to lose your authority and respond by inventing a whole new one from scratch, complete with its own letterhead and seal. Yes, she'd drawn a seal. It was a golf cart with a crown on it surrounded by the words command, control, community. I couldn't stop laughing. I showed it to my sister-in-law, who immediately said, "Do you want me to file a cease and desist just for sport?" But I had a better idea. Karen wanted a stage again, a microphone, an audience. Fine. I'd give her one. And I'd let her build it herself. Because when people are desperate to be seen, they'll do most of the work for you. I did nothing. I let her plan. I let her decorate. I let her print out 40 copies of that absurd notice and distribute them around the neighborhood. I even RSVP'd, just to ensure she thought I was coming. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I had my own project underway. Not another cart stunt, not this time. This was about letting the full story come out. The story of who Karen really was when no one was looking. I had neighbors collecting screenshots of old messages, emails she'd sent to city code offices, videos of her measuring people's lawns with a ruler, one audio clip of her threatening a mailman for delivering a package too noisily. One neighbor even unearthed an email Karen sent to animal control reporting that a Labrador on the street had too much enthusiasm. Saturday arrived with the awkward anticipation of a school play written and directed by a delusional theater kid. Karen had converted her backyard into a bizarrely formal setting. Folding chairs were arranged in precise rows, a podium stood at the front and behind it, a large vinyl banner read, "Nord welcomes you to a new era." There were 2 tables of lemonade and unsalted crackers. No one knew why the crackers were unsalted. There was no music, just the buzz of mosquitoes and the low hum of confusion. About 20 people actually showed up, mostly out of curiosity, maybe a bit of fear. Karen took the podium with the presence of a dictator who had watched too many motivational videos. She launched into a monologue about how the neighborhood had lost its way, how order must be restored, and how she would be the one to bring balance. She used the phrase moral decay 4 times. And then she made her fatal mistake. She said, loudly and with absolute confidence, "Some of you may remember the recent incident involving my personal property. I want to be clear. What happened to my cart was not justice. It was terrorism. I was the victim of a highly orchestrated psychological attack, and the person responsible must be held accountable, both morally and legally." She paused for effect, let the silence hang heavy, then added, "I have reason to believe he's planning further actions." Everyone turned to look at me. I smiled. I raised my hand like a kid in class. "Just to clarify, are you accusing me of terrorism?" Karen straightened her shoulders and replied, "I am accusing you of destabilizing this community through hostile behavior, targeted humiliation, and incitement of rebellion." She might as well have been reading from a Bond villain monologue. People shifted in their chairs, some trying to hold back laughter, others openly gawking. I took a step forward and pulled a small folder from my bag. "Cool. In that case, I brought something." I opened it and began handing out copies of the email chain Karen had sent to the HOA board trying to get a neighbor evicted over a Halloween decoration. Then I passed around her anonymous report to city zoning accusing another family of running a daycare because their cousins visited too often. I finished with a screenshot of the fake HOA badge she tried to use to scare a landscaper off someone else's property. By the time I was done, the air felt like static. Karen was frozen behind the podium, blinking like she had forgotten how to exist. Someone stood up. Marlene, the HOA vice president. She walked to the front, took the mic, and said, "This stops today. Karen, you're done. This fantasy agency you made up? It has no authority. Your obsession with control has hurt people, and it's over." The crowd clapped. Not politely, loud, full clapping. 2 people stood. Then 5. Then all of them. Karen looked around in disbelief, as if the neighborhood she thought she ruled had been replaced overnight with strangers. She mumbled something about retaining counsel and property rights, and then shuffled back inside her house like a defeated wizard whose spell had finally broken. Someone unplugged her mic. The banner sagged in the wind. The following week, Karen put her house up for sale. No fanfare, no goodbye parties. She was gone within 10 days. The cart, still perched on her roof, was eventually removed by a contractor hired by the new homeowner, who, ironically, asked me for help getting clearance for a home remodel and added, "Just promise me if I mess up, you won't put my grill on the roof or something." I laughed and said, "Only if you start your own agency." The neighborhood returned to something resembling peace. The HOA restructured into a rotating leadership model, no more single tyrants. Neighbors started talking more, waving more, even organizing block events again. The fear Karen had instilled was gone, replaced with something better, mutual respect and a shared memory of the time a glittery golf cart brought down a suburban empire. As for me, I got a framed photo of the cart on her roof printed and hung it in my home office. It sits just above my desk, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's clever, legal, and visible from 3 blocks away. And every so often, when I see a golf cart driving down the street, I can't help but grin. Because they'll never know. But I will.